Hi, I'm Izzy, and this is Undressing Four, the debut episode for my publication four. So each episode will basically be unpacking a different style that goes along with the publication each season. This season we'll be unpacking anti-fashion, which is actually my favourite style. But we'll get into that in a second. And disclaimer, we will be talking about fashion today. Fashion is subjective, so if you don't agree with what I'm saying, I am just the messenger. Don't shoot the messenger. It's basically to explain these styles to everyone. I want fashion to be accessible to everyone because I feel like a lot of trends and styles are quite exclusive, and that should not be the case. I want to open a community in each style so you can talk to like-minded individuals. So let's say this season is about anti-fashion. This opens a community, a comment space to be able to chat to people who are also interested in anti-fashion. So if they got ideas on how to upcycle, they can speak about it. And if they've got a small business, they can plug it. And all of this, and like if there's events going on in London or Manchester and blah, 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 you can go to them, you know? Which you wouldn't find out about unless you had a certain community to go to. So this is what I'm trying to open up. I'm trying to abolish gatekeeping and let everyone have this information because it's not for the exclusive few anymore. I want to open it to everyone. But I think it is a very, very relevant topic, and also people dress in this way without even realising, because I believe it's more of a mindset anyway. But I realise that about a lot of styles. Styles aren't just what you see. It's more about the person's wearing mindset and morals and how they project themselves onto the world, because the way we dress is the way we identify and want to be perceived, basically. Style has always, from the dawn of time, been about fitting in, not fitting in, wealth, class, status, politics, music sometimes, in the 80s a lot of the time. Fashion is expression, basically, and that's why it confuses people a lot when I say the term anti-fashion, because what is anti-fashion, and that's what I'm going to get into. Okay, so if we're looking at the definitions of anti-fashion, Cambridge Dictionary says, quote unquote, a style, especially a style of dressing that is intentionally not fashionable. Personally, think that's a bit of a cop-out from Cambridge, but that's a conventional viewpoint. It's taking the term very literally, when the term anti-fashion is not literal at all. It's quite abstract, like itself is very avant-garde. But I can see how it can be perceived that way. But it's more of anti-fashion is more of a deconstructive term if we're thinking philosophically. The best way I like to describe it is the way the founder described it, which he's very poetic, Yohji Yamamoto, one of the founders. He said, fashion is air, we live and breathe it, air gets polluted, and therefore so does fashion. Which I think is really nice, because it makes sense, and it makes you visualise it, something like that, I like to think, when I think anti-fashion, I think the sombre silhouettes, I think the dark clothes, I think Comme des Garçons, Margiela, I think of brands, but that's because I've been looking at this for so long. I think of kind of weird and things that you've never seen before because it didn't even cross your mind. But that's the point in anti-fashion, because anti-fashion cannot exist without these trends being there in the first place. That's why it's unpredictable, because unless the extravagant style of the 80s if that wasn't around, anti-fashion would have never existed, because it would never have a counter style to bounce off of, Okay, so what are the key features in anti-fashion? I would say rebellion and rejection as number one. Anti-fashion doesn't exist without rebellion. Inclusivity, sustainability, what else? Androgyny. The colour black is very significant. And if we're thinking anti-fashion, I think anti-fashion is a form of art in some senses, and I think the designers would agree with me also. So we're thinking postmodernism, which is like subversive kind of art after the war. Dadaism, especially nonsensical kind of crazy weird stuff. Brutalism, which is like raw, earthy, well not earthy, kind of like concrete, you know, this would be brutalist, I'd say. Kind of weird silhouettes. Surrealism, which is kind of weird and wacky things, minus the colour, I'd say. So if we're thinking art, I'm thinking this. When I'm thinking of the stuff on the runway, this is the stuff that I'm thinking of. Okay, so how did anti-fashion come about? Who started it? So I'd say, and I think a lot of people would agree with me, that the founders of anti-fashion were Yohji Yamamoto and Rei Kawakubo. You might know these two. Rei Kawakubo is the founder of Comme des Garçons, and Yohji, you might know him from his collaboration with Y3 with Adidas. But they basically came over from Tokyo in Japan and wanted to expand their shops into the Western world. 1981, they came over to Paris. And what they did in Paris, they just had their crazy designs that in the 1980s had never seen before, because they're used to like shoulder pads and bright neon colours and spandex. But they came in with these dark, sombre, distressed, like holy clothes that were like on dishevelled models walking down the runway, and everyone was horrified. The critics basically what they did was they published an article about them in Women's Wear Weekly that was like, it had like pictures of their clothing and their runway collection, and then big crosses through them like that, saying sayonara because they're Japanese. They were taking it literally as conventional people would, because they're not used to anything else. So when they do, they're horrified, which makes sense. And I was watching this documentary about anti-fashion, and people were saying that they were laughing as these women were coming down the runway, because this is not something that they've never graced their eyes before, which it makes sense that they'd be so shocked. But then they were like, oh God, I'd never wear that. 5 years later, they were ahead of their time. Rei and Yohji were ahead of their time. And then everyone started wearing it. And then it became this niche luxury brand, and it's kind of took off from there. And I know it started out in the 80s, but it's definitely still around today. So, Rei Kawakubo's influence on anti-fashion. What was it? Well, being one of the founders, she had quite the impact, laying the paveway for everyone else. So she was an interesting character, or she is. She refuses interviews, still to this day. I mean, I think she has taken a handful in her, 30, 40 years of being around. But basically, she thinks that her clothing should speak for themselves. She doesn't need any explanation. Which they do if you don't look at them literally. You need to think outside the box like she is. So Comme des Garçons, her brand, translates to like the boys in French, which completely makes sense because she is making these androgynous, monochromatic kind of silhouettes. I wouldn't say clothes as such, because it's not about the figure underneath or the body. It's not figure hugging. It's not anything like you're compared to before. It's more art. It's more like garments that have been turned into art through like pleating and padding and stitching. Everything is put in the exact right place, and it's all meticulously done. And that's why it confused people so much, because everyone is used to looking at the model look so perfectly beautiful. When she wanted to take that away, it's not the point of that, it's the point of the clothes, not the model. So we can see this. A couple of her most famous runways was her first one, her debut one, which was called Holes. I think it came out in 1983. I think it was the Intercontinental Hotel. It was her and Yohji did it. And that the backlash was insane. She got deemed Hiroshima chic, which obviously she is going to be rejecting. That's insane. That people were calling her that, but I mean, it was the 80s, so can't really say what they were on about. And it's because it was so distressed, and they hadn't seen things be purposefully distressed like that before. And also, one of her most famous ones, which actually had a lot of colour in it, which is unlike anti-fashion, it's been nicknamed Lumps and Bumps, but it's actually called body meets dress, dress meets body. This is the 1997 spring-summer collection. And it's these distorted figures that kind of makes it looks like the human is growing growths everywhere under these nice gingham little pretty dresses, which I just thought was so fun and interesting, where runways since the dawn of time have been made as like this serious event that everyone has to be sat at the sidelines like this and not enjoy it, and this is more art, and I want it to go back to that. So that's why I'm starting with anti-fashion to begin with. And that's all of these anti-fashion designers have that in common. They make their runways special, they make their clothing special, so it's making the consumer and the viewer think outside the box like they are, and stop thinking so like how society wants them to think, basically. So Yohji Yamamoto, Ray and Yohji came together when they moved from Tokyo. They debuted together, and they were very different characters. I mean, they did live together for 10 years. I don't know the relationship there, but very different characters. She was more reserved, he was quite like chatty and outgoing. But you might know Yohji as he did a collaboration with Adidas called Y3, which has been quite successful. It was mixing sportswear with high-end couture, so it was quite interesting. But Yohji, his focus was the colour black, really. He really loved the power that it gave garments. And he spoke about it a lot in interviews. He has a really good interview with Rick Owens that I will attach at the end, actually. All colours have emotional connotations. So when you think of red, you think of anger. Or when you think of yellow, you think of happiness, yeah? So when we think of black, we think of power, but we mainly think of death. And I think this death and this mourning, the colour black, is very fitting for clothing, because clothing follows this narrative of life and death. And I think anti-fashion adopted black as kind of this cyclical narrative of being like a rebirth, giving clothes a new life through seeing it through a different light, you know, by looking at a normal black t-shirt and then looking at it from a different angle, going, why don't you actually put it upside down and you spin it over and you cut over there, and you know, thinking outside the box, essentially. Because we know with fashion trends that they come back around every 20 years anyway. So why not put this kind of cyclical narrative of life and death within fashion and put it onto a piece of clothing? And I mean, Margiela did the same with his upcycling. It was all about versatility. Yeah, versatility. And looking at clothing from a different perspective. And so Yohji did this through clothes, but also through his pattern cutting. He was an expert pattern cutter, and everyone said it. He was kind of like renowned for it. It's because his mother was a seamstress and he wanted to help her out, so she made him go to seamstress school. And he came back and he loved it, and he had a passion for fashion. He wanted to make everything. But he had such an interesting way of cutting that it was similar to the way that they cut a kimono, you know? So it's the construction by you drape the clothing over the person and then you cut whilst it's on them, rather than like usual pattern cutting where you measure the body, you measure the parts and stuff like that. You drape the fabric over and then you cut in straight lines and you sew the lines together. And that's a similar way to how he worked, and that's why it was so flowy and draped and pinned, and everything was meticulously stitched and thought out. And we can see that in, what was it, fall winter 1982 to 83. It's very flowy and it has a lot of holes in it, but people deemed it like ugly and like distressed. So what did Martin Margiela bring to anti-fashion? Margiela, he's my favourite. I love his designs. He's probably one of my favourite designers. You'll probably know him best for the tabby silhouette. These are fake, obviously. Margiela, if you want to send me some real ones, I'm a size UK 5, so you can. But Margiela, you know him for his brand, Maison Margiela. He was very talented from the get-go. He went to the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Antwerp, which so did the Antwerp Six, which you might have heard of, which is this group of Belgian designers that were really influential. So Anne de Mulmeester, I don't know if I'm butchering her name, also went there. She is a big part of anti-fashion as well. But he knew them, and he decided to go on to Paris to do other things, because he's a very talented guy, and he knew that, and he then worked under Jean-Paul Gaultier for a few years, because he needed to learn how to work in a fashion house. And Jean-Paul, he knew this. He was like, why are you working here? Like, you could open your own business right now, but you're choosing not to. He was like, I need to understand how it works before I open it. And he was like, oh, yeah, okay. So they worked together for a little while until Maison Margiela was opened in 1990. I'm going to say 1991, but I think that's wrong. It might be 1980s. Fact check that. But what was he known for? He was basically known for his upcycling and his repurposing of second-hand clothing and army surplus, which is really interesting, because what he would do, he would take these used, falling apart clothing, and he would redesign them in such a beautiful way and repurpose them in such a beautiful way that he was taking this low value material and repurposing it at the toppest, the highest of class, to be sold on for thousands of pounds. And people were buying it. And that's why it's so shocking to me that people still think of anti-fashion as a style rather than like a mindset and approach, because it's the way that you view something and twist it and make it your own and make it completely innovative and completely new, not something you can buy from Dover Street Market, you know. It's creating something beautiful from nothing, and that's what he did, and he successfully did that. And some of his runway shows were the best I've ever seen. Like his, what was it, Spring Summer 1990 runway show, unbelievable. He got local school children to pick the location, so they obviously picked a little dilapidated park in Paris. He put up like gazebos everywhere, and it was on a first come first serve basis, which is unheard of for a high luxury brand runway show. And obviously the kids who chose the location, and they also wrote all the invitations, so they drew it all, and it was really cute. They sat in the front row, and they were literally sat on the floor, really cute. And these models start coming down to this blaring like techno music, and the kids just start jumping up and dancing with them and getting on. And then the models would like put them on the kids on their shoulders, and these photos are phenomenal. They're great, and if you talk to anyone about this show, they'll know what you're on about. It's just such a these shows are making like memories from just making it less serious and more about the meaning behind the clothing and not the literal meaning. So anti-fashion is about making it memorable and beautiful rather than just some boring show that someone buys for $5,000 at the end, you know. I'm speaking about like I was there. This was 10 years before I was even born, and it's still like stuck in my memory. And he obviously got bad press. Everyone who's doing something different will get bad press, but he also got absolutely great press, and he's a phenomenal designer that's still around today, and it's 2025. Like, this was 30 years ago. So, but he did get deemed, I think he got called landfill luxe, because he was using like clothes and then just resewing them in a beautiful way. And he did this with a really interesting collection, which obviously was unwearable because it was unsafe, unfit for models to wear. But it was where he worked with microbiologists to grow mold onto clothing, and then he let it grow, and then he put it in this exhibition with like a painted pair of tabbies below each one. So it kind of like built this kind of like ghostly essence to them. And then he burned them at the end because they're not They can't wear them. That's why I'm saying anti-fashion is more about art than fashion. It's more about what it stands for than what it is. And that's why anyone can wear it, because it's about what it means to you, what you perceive it as, and other people will perceive it differently because everyone's viewing from a different lens. But that's completely fine. And that's the point. And that's why you should wear whatever the you want, because it doesn't matter what other people think. At the end of the day, it's your choice. And that's why they did what they wanted, and they did it well. And it was like, nothing's going to change unless you change it. So they did. They did something different. They changed it, and it was revolutionary. Okay, so Vivienne Westwood, what does she bring to anti-fashion? Some may say that she's not anti-fashion and she's more punk, but I think she's an honourable mentioner. She needs to be mentioned because she was one of the Western influences that did change the game. She was anti-fashion in her morals, but she had a very significant punk twist. But I think she's definitely worth mentioning. So when we think of Vivienne Westwood, we think of the Orb, we think of Tartan, we think of Kate Moss, Naomi Campbell. But what she brought to anti-fashion was the perspective that they all had, which was rebellion. So she did this crazy through outrageous slogans and like provocative runways and imagery on her shirts that, I mean, she got arrested a couple times for it, so that's how bad she was going. But she was more punk because it was reflecting the zeitgeist of the UK at the time. Zeitgeist meaning the spirit of the times, like the mood of the UK of the time, and it was like 1980s, 1990s, so it was, yeah. But she was kind of presenting her clothes through art, similarly to Margiela, and it was, I would say that it was more feminine than Rei Kawakubo and Yohji Yamamoto, just because she liked to delve into making the old new again. So she looked at bodices, she looked at corsetry, she looked at petticoats, and she was taking those and she was upcycling them and making them, giving them a new life, but in a kind of punk rock artistic kind of sense. So for example, one of her most famous ones would have been the, what was it, 1993 Anglomania. So that was a lot of tartan, a lot of bodices, a lot of like strict clothing that these women were put down the runway in. And it was fun. And that's what it was, anti-fashion was like turning into. It was fun. And that was something that was kind of becoming more popular to do on runways in the 90s. And that's when it was becoming popular, anti-fashion. And you see this name come up a lot, Kate Moss. You all know and love her. But she was used in all anti-fashion campaigns, really. She was used under Yohji, she was used under Rei, she was used under Margiela, she was used with Vivienne Westwood a lot. But she was used because she had such a unique face, and she was an anti-fashion model. She had such a look to her that wasn't usual. She wasn't your conventional looking person, and that is the point of anti-fashion. It's beautiful, but it is unusual. So that's why she was used a lot. So why am I speaking about all of these designers? It's because they kind of paved the way for anti-fashion to be such an influence in the fashion industry today. So the legacy they left is really what we're on about. And it's still around. People are still dressing this way. But also, you might be dressing this way without even realising it. You know, it's more about versatility and the reuse and the recycling and the key factors that influenced them, and how you may be doing this without even realising. You may be anti-fashion without even realising. So what I mean by versatility is layering, is wearing things the way it's not intended. So like the clothing that you have in your wardrobe, I have my wardrobe over there, you have in the wardrobe right behind you. It's like, it's to the naked eye, it's one wardrobe, but if you think in an anti-fashion way, your wardrobe triples in size. It's like, why not wear a skirt as a top or a top as a skirt, you know? If it's possible, try it out. And then you might realise that your favourite top has actually like 6 different ways to wear, because no one's stopping you from wearing it in a completely different way. It's just thinking about what creative ways can I put this on, you know? So I was doing a photo shoot the other day for this publication, and I'd like to say that for the publication, I didn't buy a single new item of clothing. And I did shoot men in this magazine, so I'm like, where do I source this clothing from? I don't have much men's clothes. Like, I have some baggy clothes. I don't really know where I'm going to source this. So I went to some charity shops, didn't really find what I was finding. I bought some second-hand items, but mostly it was either borrowed, sourced through costume departments, or second-hand. And so, being the theme of anti-fashion, quite androgynous, dressed this man in so many different things: men's wear, women's wear, skirts, dresses, anything material-wise. And I had this shrug and this pair of sleeves kind of crochet thing that I styled, I think, 5 different ways. I styled it as it's what it's meant to, styled it as a skirt, styled it as like a headscarf, styled it as a shrug, styled it as a top. Literally so many different ways open up when you just open your eyes and see that you are allowed to wear things the way they're not intended. And that is kind of the approach of anti-fashion. It's thinking outside the box and thinking, no one's going to stop me if I wear this in the wrong way and it looks good, you know? I think that's what they were kind of encouraging you to not be so rigid in fashion and look elsewhere and look for inspiration everywhere. And that's why I kind of want to leave these comments open and to create this sort of community, so you can add these ideas and plug your Instagrams, plug your small businesses, just talk about any successful anti-fashion sort of thing that you did and you thought, this is a good idea, maybe I'll share it, because we're not gatekeeping anymore. No, not happening. And my future predictions. So my fashion forecast, I did little research on WGSN, and basically the way that we're seeing it come in, or we've always seen it come in, is repurposing, versatility, and the future of fabric. And what I mean by that is repurposing is like recycling, upcycling, like Margiela did, Viv did it for a bit, kind of taking like the clothes that are too small for you, too big for you, whatever, instead of throwing them to a charity shop or throwing them away or throwing them to landfill, God forbid, because don't do that, because there's already enough in landfill. Just reuse it. I can't sew to save my life, but doesn't mean that it doesn't have a second life. You could try to do anything with it, and if not, donate it to then be upcycled in some sort of way. But also, clothes have many purposes, and you don't have to just use it for wearing. You can use it for a lot of artistic projects. But let's say that you do know how to upcycle, and you do have a sewing machine, or you have ideas. Put it in the comments. This is what it's here for. Let me know how you can do that in many ways. I saw this really one way on TikTok. I'll plug it. And it was like these little industrial fisherman clips. And it was a shirt that she had, and it was no sewing at all. And she put it on, she folded the buttons back and she put it on the shirt and she clipped it together so it was tight, and it looked phenomenal, and I wanted to do that. I was like, that looks so good, and I've never seen anything like it. And that's why you should share your ideas so other people can do the same, because this is how styles grow and how creative people like grow as individuals, because I would never have thought that unless I saw it. So anti-fashion cannot exist without the fashion trend being there in the first place, because then that fashion trend has to have an anti, and that is the anti-fashion, you know? So it's unpredictable, and that is the point of anti-fashion. I think I predict anti-fashion will come in as an approach because people have started to reject micro trends and macro trends. Oh, another bug. But I think it will be in collaboration with the technology that we see now, because each year is getting more and more. So AI and future materials, like someone was making leather out of mushrooms and making biodegradable biodegradable like fabrics that can just disintegrate eventually for landfills, and using AI as a form, AI and digital like characters as a form of fashion and promoting what you're wearing, which I think is so smart, can I say, because everyone is on their phones more than ever because of social media and everything. So why not promote fashion through digital characters and gamified versions, because it makes it fun, it makes it different, it thinks outside the box like anti-fashion does. So definitely think that's going to come in, and that's how we're going to see it. I think people are going to hop back onto anti-fashion. I mean, it's still about, people still do it. It's always been more of a niche style because of how outrageous and kind of unusual it is. But I think more things will be deemed and considered anti-fashion because people are starting to reject trends. And the whole theme of anti-fashion is rebellion and rejection. And amongst the youth especially, people are starting to do that. And find what's you and what you consider as your personality through the way you dress. And then that's when you'll realise that you are projecting your identity as anti-fashion or any style, you know? And that is why I wanted to choose anti-fashion to start off with, because it's such a fascinating style, is it not? And it kind of paves the way for all the other styles. And it's still such a revolutionary topic to this day, and people always bring it up in the fashion industry because of how wild it was. But I just wanted to, I hope that you guys understood what I was waffling on about, and I've kind of broken it down for you because this is like months of research for me. And I feel like a lot of fashion information that is put out there is quite wordy and quite techy, and it's inaccessible really, and I want it to be accessible to everyone because it's interesting, first of all, and second of all, why not? Like, people deserve to know what they're wearing, why they're wearing it, wear it in a confident way, that they know how they're coming across and stuff like that. And it's just kind of just like a fun fact, you know, just know what you're wearing. And I hope that this creates kind of a community for everyone to chat about what they love and what they wear. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you learnt a lot about anti-fashion. This is Izzy, and this is Undressing 4, and I'm signing off.